Hello everyone and welcome to the Raw review here on Wrestling with Regret. Well, it's the first episode of Raw after Hell in a Cell, and the show opens up with a former champion, Drew McIntyre, making his way to the ring. His first thing he says is he will become a champion again one day. He also then butchers a quote from Rocky that he says he lives his life by. Out come The Miz and John Morrison. Miz is the new Mr. Money in the Bank after beating Otis at the pay-per-view. He and John spend a few minutes kind of taking the piss out of Drew here, kind of mocking him, saying, hey, second place isn't bad for everybody. And Miz says history will repeat itself because he wants to eventually cash in on Randy Orton once again like he did in 2010 to become WWE champion. Drew's had enough of these two jokers. He headbutts The Miz. John tries to appeal to Drew by speaking in a Scottish accent. It does not work. Eventually Miz and Morrison escape after the scuffle, and Drew says he's got plans for The Miz. We find out later on that Drew will inevitably destroy The Miz in a match later tonight. We learn that this year's Survivor Series is going to be Raw versus SmackDown once again. No NXT this year by the look of things, which is pretty disappointing when you consider all the effort they made to really legitimize NXT and get them over on Raw and SmackDown and have them win the Survivor Series overall matches last year. To have them not be involved at all feels like a bit of a disservice. But my whole thing is, every year it's about brand supremacy and bragging rights. Look, the majority of the players who are going to be in these men and women's tag team matches just switched brands not more than 2 weeks ago. Brand supremacy and brand loyalty should mean nothing to these people. So the first qualifying match for the men's side of things on Raw is going to be between AJ Styles and Jeff Hardy once again. Hooray! Though in all seriousness though, I still cannot get over the size difference between Styles and his bodyguard, Jordan Mogbian, or as they just constantly refer to him on commentary, this man. Before the match, AJ says he should be the team captain for Raw, and that at the end of the day, Jeff Hardy's going to go back to the bottle. The match itself was fine, was there any doubt? In the end though, AJ ends up winning the match relatively clean after a phenomenal forearm. Like, Mogbian gets involved a little bit before the break where he kind of catches Jeff mid-dive, and somehow that's not a disqualification, and then later he just kind of frightens Jeff supposedly, like out of the corner of Jeff's eye. He spooks him. So that's how AJ ultimately wins this thing. And then after the match, Elias decks Jeff with a guitar, so the feud between them is not over yet. Backstage, R-Truth says he's going to be scouting his competition in a tag match later on. He adds that his third middle name is Dangerously right after Cobblepot. But then go to the match where you see Akira Tozawa and Drew Gulak taking on the Lucha House Party. A minute into the match, R-Truth comes out and makes his entrance, and he's immediately just pounced upon by all the participants in the tag team match. So in the middle of this matchup here, you're getting outside involvement from somebody who's not a participant. And again, no disqualifications are happening in this matchup. We've seen tag matches get broken up on DQ for far less egregious things than what we're seeing here in this matchup. We see a lot of roll-up attempts. Lindsay ends up pinning Gulak in the match proper to win, and then more chasing of R-Truth, and then he runs away. Thanks for coming! It's a mad tea party at the Firefly Funhouse. You have Bray Wyatt dressed as the Mad Hatter, complete with creepy new contact lenses. Then Alexa Bliss comes in dressed as Alice in Wonderland. Alexa poisons Ramblin' Rabbit with arsenic, and he has this kind of clay vomit. It's kind of graphic. And then Alexa has spooky contacts herself and says, let him in. They plug that Randy Orton's going to be on Moment of Bliss, and we cut to Bray, who's standing in front of the portrait of the burning building behind him. And so it's a callback to when Orton burned down the Wyatt compound. And then Bray has the crucifix and he beats Ramblin' Rabbit, again, who's alive now, to death once again. A dark episode of the Funhouse this week, but one I was definitely interested in. I'm still getting used to seeing Bray play off someone like Alexa Bliss. Like, it's just a different dynamic than what we've ever seen him do on television all these years. So it takes a bit of getting used to. It does have a lot of potential though, and it's growing on me. We go backstage to see Keith Lee. He says last week Braun Strowman took the cheap way out to win his match, but next time Keith will show him who the real monster is. He then says he will walk with Elias coming up next. Elsewhere backstage, Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler have approached Adam Pearce with their respective lists of who they feel should go into the women's Survivor Series match with them. They each declare themselves team captains. There's some funny kind of like repartee with the two, and we'll find out where the women's team ends up later on tonight. Your next qualifying match for the men's team at Survivor Series is Elias takes on Keith Lee. Elias tries to play a song at the beginning, but he's cut off by Lee, and on commentary they mention mentioned that Elias cost Jeff Hardy his match with AJ Styles earlier, which is absolutely not what happened, so they try to correct that line after the commercial break. In the match itself, though, Elias looks to have things in hand. When Jeff Hardy's music plays and the Titantron plays and everything, that distraction's enough for Lee to end up winning with the Spirit Bomb. So in case you're keeping score, Keith Lee had to use Jeff Hardy's help via music to beat Elias. Meanwhile, AJ Styles had a literal giant in his corner who played almost no part in his win over Jeff Hardy. Wonderful. And then also the cherry on top is that Jeff Hardy hits Elias in the back with a guitar of his own. Up next, 8-man elimination tag team match as the Hurt Business take on the 4 male members of Retribution. Before the match, MVP says that the Hurt Business was the first ones to confront Retribution from the beginning, and that WWE will pay them handsomely once they get rid of the group. And Shelton Benjamin adds they'll be paid in gold. Folks, this match is bad for Retribution. Like, the only eliminations they get are MVP being distracted after Mia Yim gets in the ring and pretends to be possessed or have a rash of some kind, so that's nice. And then there's like a double count out elimination as well that involves Bobby Lashley. In the end, Mustafa Ali's by himself and he ends up DQing himself after attacking with a steel chair. Wow, Retribution is a really terrible group, and I feel bad for everyone involved on both sides of this encounter trying to make this shit work and get it over. All these months they spent building the group, and for a brief time they were treated as the be-all end-all, the biggest singular threat to WWE, and then later to a lesser extent Raw, and then it's completely evaporated. And now, like, oh, they're just losing every one of their matches, and they look like such jobberific jobbers. The jobberest jobbers that ever jobbed is Retribution right now. And then to make matters worse, really just kind of really pour salt in the wound, we get later on another promo from Mustafa Ali where he says, it doesn't matter that we lost, because in the end, we still won. I don't know if you know how winning and losing works, Mustafa Ali, and if the whole threat is, oh, we can just take a laptop or a cell phone and ruin people's lives, I would much rather than just do like sneaky hacker stuff instead of actually trying to wrestle, because clearly that shit ain't working. Backstage, Angel Garza's hitting on Dana Brooke and Mandy Rose, then turns his attention to the women's tag champs Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler by the end of the scene. We then see Drew McIntyre taking on The Miz. It's supposed to be a singles match, but it's essentially 2-on-1 because John Morrison keeps getting his shit in. Eventually, Drew thwarts Jomo, hucks the Money in the Bank briefcase into like the lights by the stage, and then he beats Miz with a Claymore, and then he points to the Thunderdome crowd to see a very pixelated, who is believed to be Matthew McConaughey, maybe, in the Thunderdome audience. I'm so glad they took their time to actually kind of point that out to us, because we never would have known. And then afterward, we see Drew being interviewed backstage where he says, you know, Drew will have a nice moment of non-bliss later in the night. So I think the match itself was a good little pickup for Drew, nice way to get some of his heat back after losing on Sunday. Backstage, the New Day caught the Street Profits gimmick right on down to their old days of just providing exposition and telling you what matches were going to come up later on. They and Asuka run down the champion versus champion matches we're seeing at Survivor Series. The Hurt Business show up and they say to the New Day that they want to have a shot at the tag titles eventually, and Asuka and the New Day laugh in their face, and that's where the segment ends. I enjoyed this segment, seeing Xavier and Kofi, you know, mocking the Street Profits and kind of making fun of their gimmicks and telling, and Kofi doing the sleepy eye thing where he's going full Dawkins. That brought a smile to my face. It's pretty funny stuff. Adam Pearce and Pat Buck are in the ring to introduce the women's competitors in the Survivor Series match for Raw. No qualifying matches needed apparently, because the women's rosters are spread so thin. Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler, the first two introduced, then Mandy Rose and Dana Brooke. Who will be the fifth member, they say. Nia and Shayna are arguing still over who the captain is, and then Adam Pearce announces we're going to have a fatal four-way to determine the final entrant, the final person on Team Raw. It's Lana, Lacey Evans, Nikki Cross, and Peyton Royce. Oh, Nikki, what did they do to your theme music? It's a pretty good match by everyone involved here. It ends with a big Tower of Doom spot with three of the ladies, and then at the very end, Lana swoops in and covers Nikki to win the match, and so the least likely competitor is going to be the fifth woman in the Raw Women's Survivor Series team. Shock of shocks, everyone's reaction shots were just tremendous. I did enjoy that in the aftermath of the match. So Nia then hugs Lana, and then she gestures to Shayna and goes, get the table ready. And so Shayna just flips the lid off the table, and Lana suffers the sins of Miro once again. Good old reliable spot. Oh, Lana, will you ever win? Well, she did win here tonight. In fact, mark my words, somehow, some way, she's going to be the sole survivor at Survivor Series. The new champion, Randy Orton's interviewed backstage, and he says he does not fear the Fiend, and he will introduce him to the RKO. We then see that aforementioned very empty medium brainless promo by Mustafa Ali. And then our last qualifying match of the night sees Matt Riddle taking on Sheamus. I loved this match. It was very physical. These guys just left it all in the ring there. Ultimately, after this great back and forth, Sheamus wins with an emphatic brogue kick. Very competitive contest here. It took us a while to get to an entertaining match, but this is easily the best match of the night. Time now for a moment of bliss with special guest Randy Orton. Now, I know Orton's gimmick is very kind of like stripped down, no frills kind of thing, but I find it odd that for the first new champion on Raw in 7 months since Drew McIntyre won at WrestleMania, it's kind of like, oh, here's Orton. He's a champion now. Here you go. Belt on him now. Yay. Like, there needs to be a bigger deal made of that, I feel. Like, Drew McIntyre being the first one to come out tonight and still be kind of like on the surface, very like, oh, gee, shucks kind of thing. And then Orton kind of getting this, his first on-camera, in-ring thing after winning the championship is moment of bliss. Like, okay. Orton looks perturbed by Alexa's line of questioning and asks if she has any surprises for him, asks if the Fiend is here. Suddenly, Drew McIntyre's music plays. He comes out and the two of them has fight. Drew's about to hit the Claymore with the lights cut out, and then we get the red lights and the Fiend sounds. Drew's still in the ring. Orton is trying to escape on the ramp, and then behind him, he realizes the Fiend is there. And kind of a great moment here where he picks the lesser of two evils and goes back to the ring to continue fighting Drew. The Fiend disappears, and the brawl continues as we cut to black and the show is over. That was an interesting way to close the show. You know, even though things on Raw will probably have to kind of be on pause for a little bit until after Survivor Series, we're setting up that not only is Orton fighting, Drew McIntyre, but also Bray Wyatt, who he has a complicated, history with both men, one more recently than the other. I'm really wondering how they're going to, play into the history that Orton and Bray had a few years ago when Orton was part of the Wyatt family, and then Orton beat him for the championship. Like, there's a lot of gold in that storyline, and I hope they can kind of mine that and make it work and make it make sense and be entertaining. But then the Survivor Series thing's looming in the distance here, and Orton doesn't have time to worry about that because he's going to fight Roman Reigns. So a lot of things going on for Orton right now. He's got his irons in a lot of different fires. So we'll have to see where it all shakes out. But I mean, with three pending threats right now, two more serious than the others because they're on the same brand as him, like a lot of things can be opened up. A lot of possibilities lay before us right now. My grade for this week's Raw is a C, just down the middle. It's a good thing they can focus on this brand supremacy hogwash in Survivor Series for a few weeks because it will hopefully help them kind of rebuild, because a lot of the other storylines you see on Raw right now feels like no one's behind the wheel. I will say I think that The Fiend and Alexa Bliss were used far better this week than last. I think that there's a lot of interesting possibilities with the WWE Championship picture, and we got exactly one good match on the night. But then there's the same old crap they've been doing so often with guys like Retribution and guys like Keith Lee in very blatant ways that are really hard to ignore. And again, I must reiterate, brand supremacy and brand loyalty really should mean nothing when the wrestlers hop from show to show so often. So why do they keep beating that dead horse? But let me know what you thought about Raw this week in the comments section below. And a reminder, this is your last week to pick up the exclusive limited edition Wrestling Gargoyle t-shirt over at prowrestlingtees.com/wrestlingwithregret. After November 1st, these shirts are gone for good. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.